Zara Orwin stood at the edge of the wrecked observation deck, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the abandoned spaceship. The remains of the old warship lay in ruin, floating silently in the void of space. Its once proud hull now barely resembled the sleek vessel that had once ruled the stars, reduced to a haunted shell, forgotten and forsaken by time. The atmosphere inside was thick with the scent of rust and burnt circuits. The only sound was the faint hum of her suit's life support systems, as she took in the desolation of this derelict wreck. "Great place for a field trip," Nico's voice crackled over the comms. He had a way of making even the most dire situations seem absurd. "It's like the galaxy's largest junkyard." Zara didn't respond, her gaze still locked on the shattered windows that once looked out across the stars. Somewhere out there was the mothership. Somewhere out there, the Zarkians had set up shop. If she and her ragtag crew didn't act fast, Earth would be their graveyard. She turned toward the rest of her crew. There was barely a dozen of them, and though they had been fighting together for years, Zara often felt like she was leading a collection of misfits. There was Nico, the eccentric engineer who could turn anything into a weapon, or a ship, or a trap, all with just a handful of spare parts and a ridiculous amount of duct tape. Then there was Zeke, the gruff ex-soldier with a past even darker than his moods, and Captain Amara, the last officer of the old Earth fleet who had lost everyone she loved to the invasion. Despite their differences, Zara knew they were family. She pulled her helmet off, letting the cool air of the ship's interior rush over her face. Her dark hair, cut short to accommodate the suit, fluttered slightly, and she scanned her crew with a solemn expression. "We've found it," Zara said, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "The weapon. The Zarkians call it the Cry of the Stars, and if it works like they say, it's capable of wiping out any remaining resistance." Zeke's lips curled into a half-snarl. "We've faced worse." Zara knew better than to believe in blind optimism. "It's not like anything we've faced before, Zeke. This weapon, it doesn't just kill. It breaks people. Destroys their will to fight. Turns them into mindless slaves." Nico whistled low through his teeth. "That sounds like fun." Zara ignored him. She was used to Nico's irreverence, but his humor was often a mask for his own fear, the kind of fear that all of them felt deep down but never spoke of. There were moments when Zara wondered if any of them truly believed they could win. The rebels had been fighting for years against the alien forces that had overwhelmed Earth and wiped out the great human empire. For so long, it felt like all they did was survive. But Zara was a leader. She wasn't here to just survive. She was here to win. She stepped past her crew and moved into the heart of the wrecked ship, heading for the core. The weapon they sought was deep inside, a technological marvel the Zarkians had crafted in secret. It could break the human spirit, sever the very thing that made people fight for their survival. Zara couldn't let that happen. Not on her watch. As they made their way through the wreck, Zara couldn't help but think of the early days of the rebellion. The first battle. How naive they all were then. They thought the war would be quick, clean, like the wars of old. But the Zarkians weren't like any enemy they had fought before. They didn't just conquer, they assimilated. They turned the human race into tools. And those who resisted, well, they either died or became part of the weapon. Zara had seen it all. Friends turned into enemies. Cities reduced to dust. And the last remnants of humanity scattered across the galaxy, fighting to survive in pockets of rebellion. She had never imagined that she'd be the one to lead them. But somehow, she'd become the face of hope. She wasn't sure what she believed in anymore, but she knew this: if they were to win, this weapon had to be destroyed. They reached the inner chamber of the wrecked ship. The walls were covered with strange markings, alien in design, and the air was thick with the hiss of old machinery struggling to stay online. Zara's heart rate quickened. She didn't know what she expected, but what they found made her stomach drop. The weapon was not a machine. It was something far more terrifying. A mass of living matter, suspended in a cocoon of glowing energy. Zara felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up as the realization hit her. This weapon wasn't just a tool of war. It was a sentient being. The Zarkians had created it, perhaps even birthed it. It was designed to infiltrate the minds of humans, to break them down, to turn them into hollow shells of themselves. Zara turned back to the team, her face pale. This isn't just a weapon. It's a parasite. We need to destroy it, now. Nico looked uneasy. But how? We're in the heart of their empire now. If this thing is alive, killing it might trigger some kind of reaction. We don't have a choice, Zara said, her voice steel. We destroy it, or we lose everything. The crew moved quickly to set up the explosives, their tension palpable. As they worked, Zara's mind raced. She knew what she had to do, but a nagging thought kept creeping in. What if this was all for nothing? What if there was more waiting for them, another weapon, another way to crush their resistance? Zeke was the first to break the silence. If we don't get out of here in the next few minutes, we're gonna have more problems than just a lost war. Zara nodded. I know. Just keep moving. They were almost done when the ship shook violently, and an alarm blared to life. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the hum of alien machinery grew deafening. Zara's heart skipped a beat. The weapon wasn't going down without a fight. The creature inside the cocoon began to writhe, its tendrils stretching out in all directions. The walls of the ship groaned under the strain as the weapon began to awaken. Zara realized with growing horror that they hadn't just triggered a countdown, they'd activated the weapon's defense systems. The ship's gravity suddenly reversed, pulling them all towards the ceiling, and the walls shifted, closing in on them. Move! Now! Zara screamed, scrambling to regain her footing. Nico yanked a lever, and the gravity stabilized. But it was too late. The weapon was active. Its psychic presence flooded the ship, pressing down on their minds. Zara could feel it. It was like a suffocating weight, pulling at the edges of her thoughts, trying to erase everything that made her human. She fought it, pushing back with all her might, but it was getting harder. We need to go, Zeke growled, pulling Zara toward the exit. This is it, Captain. We've lost. Zara shook her head, her voice low and determined. Not yet. Not while I'm still breathing. But even as she spoke, the weight in her mind grew heavier. She had to stop this. She couldn't let it win. Zara pushed through the fog in her mind, every thought feeling like it was being drowned in a sea of static. The ship shuddered around her, the alien machinery groaning in protest as the weapon's psychic influence spread like a disease through the air. Nico's voice cut through the haze, sounding distant and distorted. Captain, he shouted, his voice breaking through the psychic pressure just enough to reach her. We need to get out, now. But Zara couldn't move. Her limbs felt heavy, like they were encased in concrete. Every step felt like dragging her body through thick molasses. And the pull of the weapon was like a whisper, a soft seduction that promised peace, freedom from the fight. Her vision blurred at the edges, and for a moment, she thought she saw the faces of her family. Her mother, her father, her brother, all smiling, waiting for her to join them. The illusion of comfort was fleeting, though. Zara clenched her fists, forcing herself to look away from the shimmering image of her past. She couldn't afford to lose herself in it. Not now. She had one job, one task left, and that was to stop the weapon before it wiped out what was left of humanity's will to fight. Zeke was ahead of them, his eyes wild with determination as he cut through the pressure of the weapon's psychic influence. His voice rang out, sharp and grating. Keep moving, Zara. We've got seconds before it activates fully. Zara forced herself to snap back to reality. She could feel the weight of the creature, the weapon, pressing down harder on her mind. Every part of her body screamed to give in, to just collapse under the pressure, but she couldn't let herself succumb. Not while there was still hope. Not while there were people still depending on her. Zeke reached her side, grabbing her arm with a grip that almost bruised. He was strong, and the intensity in his eyes burned like fire. "This is your last chance, Captain. We need to destroy it, now." Zara nodded, focusing on the detonator strapped to her belt. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the choice she had to make. This weapon, it was alive. It had its own will, its own dark intelligence. To destroy it, she knew, would trigger a chain reaction that would likely consume them all. There was no guarantee they would make it out, but there was no choice. The alternative was unimaginable. With a final burst of willpower, Zara yanked the detonator free. The ship seemed to buckle around them, the walls pulsing in rhythm with the throbbing psychic frequency of the weapon. She glanced at her crew. Nico was at the back, still fiddling with the ship's broken systems, trying to get their escape route online. Zeke, ever the pragmatist, was already looking for a way out. But there was no escape. Not now. Zara's hand hovered over the detonator, the weight of her decision settling over her like a crushing weight. She could feel the weapon fighting back, a psychic claw scrabbling at her mind. It was trying to break her resolve, to pull her into submission. But Zara gritted her teeth, refusing to give in. She knew what had to be done. With a sharp breath, she slammed her thumb down on the detonator. The blast was instant. A violent surge of energy blasted out from the core of the ship, sending shockwaves through every inch of the wrecked vessel. Zara was thrown off her feet, her body slammed against the walls, her vision swimming with flashes of light. For a moment, she thought she might lose consciousness. But then the pain was gone, replaced by a sudden, eerie silence. The pressure in her mind lifted. The weapon was gone. Zara slowly pushed herself to her feet, a strange sense of calm washing over her. It was done. She had done it, but as the dust settled, a bitter truth seeped into her consciousness. She knew there would be no victory celebrations, no cheers. The rebellion was far from over. Zara had no illusions left. She had destroyed the weapon, yes, but in doing so, she had sealed her own fate. She turned to her crew, and for the first time in a long while, her expression was one of pure, unshakable resolve. "We fight on," she said softly, the words carrying weight beyond anything they had ever spoken. "But we've lost a piece of ourselves today." Nico, ever the joker, forced a grin despite the fear in his eyes. "Well, looks like I'll have to find something else to fix, huh?" Zeke only nodded, his jaw set, a quiet acceptance in his gaze. There was nothing more to say. They all knew the cost, but Zara wasn't thinking about the cost anymore. She was thinking about what came next. Earth wasn't free. The Zarkians still had control. Their mothership was gone, yes, but the war wasn't over. It had only just begun. Zara turned toward the exit of the ship. "Let's go," she ordered. "We've got a rebellion to rebuild." The wrecked ship began to fall apart around them, the remnants of the weapon's destruction taking its toll on the already dilapidated hull. Zara's eyes scanned the horizon of the wreck, the black emptiness of space stretching infinitely ahead. Their time on this ship was over, but the real battle had only just begun. As the team made their way to the escape pods, Zara caught a final glimpse of the weapon's destroyed core, now nothing more than a pile of scrap and burned circuitry. She had done it. But as the pod doors sealed shut behind them, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that the true cost of their war was yet to come. The stars outside the pod window twinkled coldly, a silent witness to the lives that had been sacrificed and the lives that would be lost in the battles yet to come. The journey back to Earth was long and silent. There were no words. The rebellion's victory, however fleeting, had been hollowed by the sacrifice Zara had made. The crew of the last rebel ship had seen the true face of war. There would be no simple victories. The fight for freedom was never going to be easy, not while the Zarkians still ruled. Zara sat in the quiet of the pod, her thoughts distant. She thought of her family again, the ones she had lost, the ones she would never see again. The ones she had fought for. The faces of her people. But there was no time for grief now. the escape pod shook as it entered the atmosphere, the heat of re-entry scorching its surface. Zara braced herself, knowing what awaited them on Earth. The ground would be scorched by war. Cities would be ashes. And yet, there was hope. There had to be. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise of the pod fade. The chaos of the war, the fear, the loss, it would all be there when they landed. But in her heart, Zara carried something more. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. The stars would cry out for freedom, and humanity would answer. When the pod finally landed, Zara was the first to step out. The ground was rocky, scorched by the heat of ongoing battle. The remnants of the resistance forces were scattered in the distance, fighting back the Zarkians one small battle at a time. Zara looked out over the horizon, where the distant forms of soldiers and civilians moved, continuing the struggle. There was no victory song, no trumpet fanfare. There was only the fight. And for Zara, that was enough. She had given everything. But as long as there was breath in her lungs, she would fight. She would lead. She would never give up, and she would never let the stars cry again. Zara stood on the surface of the earth, her boots sinking slightly into the charred soil as she watched the rebel soldiers gather in the distance. The harsh wind whipped across her face, carrying the scent of burning cities and the echo of ongoing skirmishes. This was no victory. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The escape pod had landed on the outskirts of what had once been a bustling metropolis, now reduced to rubble. Zara had seen it before, entire cities obliterated by the Zarkians, their architecture and culture turned to dust. But this time was different. This time, they had struck at the heart of the enemy's weapon, and Zara knew the rebellion would no longer be something the aliens could ignore. It would ignite the spark of resistance across the globe. Captain, Zeke's voice broke her thoughts. He approached her, wiping the sweat from his brow despite the cold. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, but his resolve was as solid as ever. The others are ready. Zara nodded without turning her head. We'll meet them in the command center. We've got a long road ahead of us. They moved quickly, the quiet intensity of their mission settling over them like a second skin. Despite the devastation that had befallen Earth, there was a palpable sense of urgency in the air, as if time itself was pressing down on them. Every minute was precious. The rebel camp was hidden in a network of underground bunkers, a labyrinth of concrete and steel that had once been a government facility before it fell under Zarkian control. Zara hadn't seen it in months. When they had first arrived, it had been little more than a whisper, a faint glimmer of hope. But now, it was the beating heart of the resistance. The people here were survivors, fighters, and dreamers, all clinging to the belief that one day, they would take back their planet. Inside the bunker, the atmosphere was tense. A half-dozen rebel leaders, ranging from former military officers to civilian strategists, had gathered around a long table. Maps of Earth's remaining strongholds were sprawled across the surface, and the air was thick with plans and counterplans. Zara entered the room without ceremony, her presence immediately commanding attention. Captain, Imara greeted her, nodding gravely. The older woman had seen as much war as Zara, and then some. Her eyes held a wisdom that came from years of hard experience. Zara had trusted her from the start. The weapon is destroyed. The Zarkians won't have that leverage anymore. Zara felt a slight relief, but it was fleeting. There were other weapons. Other ways the aliens could crush them. The weapon might be gone, but the fight was far from over. Good, Zara said, taking a seat at the table. But we're not finished. Not by a long shot. The Zarkians still control this planet. The people here are still enslaved. We need to take them down. All of them. A heavy silence settled over the room, and Zara could see the weight of her words sinking in. The rebellion had always been about survival, about getting by, striking when they could, retreating when they must. But now, it was different. They had the momentum. They had the will. They just needed the strength, Zara, Zeke said, his voice sharp. There's something else you should know. Zara turned to face him, her brow furrowing. What is it? We've got word from the outer colonies. The Zarkians have deployed new enforcers. These ones are different. He paused, searching for the right words. They're not like the others. They're faster. Stronger. Smarter. We've intercepted transmissions that suggest they're adapting. Zara's pulse quickened. Adapting? What does that mean? It means, Zeke said slowly, the Zarkians are evolving. They're learning from their mistakes. They're not just invaders anymore. They're thinking like us. Zara felt a shiver run down her spine. It was one thing to fight an enemy who relied on brute force, but to face an enemy that could think and evolve, that could outthink them, was something entirely different. She clenched her fists. So, what do we do? Imara stepped forward, her face grim but resolute. We fight. We've done it before, and we can do it again. But this time, we do it differently. We take the fight to them. All of them. Zara's gaze swept across the room, locking eyes with each leader, feeling the gravity of their combined determination. They had no choice. If the Zarkians were adapting, they needed to adapt too. They needed to outthink the aliens. They needed to hit them where it hurt. What's the plan? Zara asked, her voice steady but full of fire. Imara spread a map of Earth's remaining strongholds across the table. We've identified key locations, resistance pockets that still have some firepower. We can't hit all of them at once, but we can create a chain reaction. If we hit the right targets, we can destabilize their command structure. We take out their leaders, we take out their control. We hit them where it hurts. Zara leaned over the map, her finger tracing the strategic points. We can't afford to make mistakes. One wrong move and the whole operation could collapse. Zeke spoke up again. And we're running out of time. If we don't act soon, the Zarkians will regroup. They're already coordinating new forces. We need to strike first, Zara said, her voice sharp. We'll need every last ounce of strength we've got. No one gets left behind. Imara nodded. We'll need to assemble all available forces. I'll reach out to the outer colonies and the remaining cities. We'll need supplies, equipment, and support. Zara took a deep breath, her mind racing with the enormity of the task ahead. She could feel the weight of the rebellion on her shoulders, the weight of every life that depended on their success. But there was no turning back now. They were past the point of no return. We'll start at dawn, she said, looking up from the map. Gather the troops. Get everyone ready. This is it. This is our chance to take Earth back. As the room filled with quiet murmurs of agreement, Zara allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The war had cost them so much. The loss of so many good people. The scars on the land and the people who still fought to survive, but in that moment, there was something else, something stronger than the weight of the past. There was hope. Hope that, together, they could still turn the tide. Hope that Earth might one day be free. The following hours were a blur of preparation. Zara's team worked feverishly to coordinate the mission. Messages were sent to other resistance groups, weapons were stockpiled, and strategies were drawn. In the dimly lit bunker, the weight of the coming battle hung over them like a storm cloud. But even amidst the uncertainty, Zara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time, resolve. The next morning, before the first light of dawn, Zara and her crew set out. The rebellion was ready. The time for survival was over. It was time for humanity to take the fight to the Zarkians. Zara's heart pounded in her chest as they boarded the transport ships. She didn't look back. There was nothing left to look back on. Only forward. Only the battle that awaited them. And as the ships rose into the air, the earth below burning with the fires of war, Zara knew one thing for sure: the rebellion wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win, and they would stop at nothing to do it.